First of all, I just want to welcome everybody. I got to know Rachel a few years ago when the Saudi and other, but principally Saudi, effort to exploit the extremely plaintiff-friendly libel laws of Great Britain decided to use a few trillion of their dollars and to expand their power and authority, not having been satisfied with having had a book burning at Cambridge University of a book that was critical of them. This massive machine was on one side, and on the other were, for a time, several major publications in the United States, famous leading newspapers and magazines. They all caved. One person didn't cave. She's sitting on my left. She took on the Saudis and their trillions, and she basically won. Rachel's law is now law in New York and I think 4 or 5 other jurisdictions, and there's a version 12. It keeps growing. And there are federal statutes that are working in this direction. She changed a lot with her incredible stubbornness and intelligence and ability. I got to say, I think stubbornness for me is an extremely positive virtue, and Rachel certainly demonstrated it in this. The American Center for Democracy, which I'm on the board of and which she chairs, has done a great deal to bring issues such as economic warfare to the front of policymakers' discussions here in Washington. We had a session chaired by Senator John Kyle a couple of years ago, and then one at George Mason with Chairman Mike Rogers, Chair of House Intelligence, and others, one on EMP. ACD's published over 500 articles on these and related issues in their daily blog, and they are particularly focused heavily on terrorist financing, the financial picture of what's happening with the radical Islamist movements such as the Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra and Hezbollah, in not only in the Middle East but well beyond. Let me just say a very quick word about the scope of what we hope to talk about and swap some ideas on today. First of all, as Peter Pry keeps saying and hopefully is succeeding in restructuring the terminology to some extent. When we talk about cyber, we tend to include electromagnetic pulse. It is so included by the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, and the Iranians. And not because they are exactly the same thing, but because their functions of sort of total information warfare overlap. And some of the technologies that are relevant to one are relevant to the other, and some of the protective technologies that are relevant to one are relevant to the other. So although one important focus is to ensure that when people don't spend much time on security and focus their attention on, quote, smart grids and kind of blink like deer in the headlights when you tell them that the way they're doing their smart grids looks like it's not only going to be possible for you to turn down the thermostat in your house via your cell phone, but a teenager in Shanghai to do the same thing to your house, and perhaps other far more mischievous undertakings. Most of the people who work on cyber security, and particularly who are interested in smart grid, are very difficult to yaw around to focusing on some of the security aspects rather than just the technological, isn't it fun, look what we can do with the internet, the smart grid. So we plan to look at traditional cyber, but also, of course, at EMP, both solar caused and malevolently caused. And that is a huge subject, one that is just beginning to break into the public discussion. It's been helped immeasurably, Bill, by your writings, Bill, by your novel and others. There are just a lot of people that are, Peter have started in one way or another bringing this issue to the fore. It is insidious because if you look at the vulnerability from intentionally caused EMP, it's a much simpler task than designing and developing and testing and targeting let's say an ICBM or an SLBM that can hit a target on the ground. If all you have to do is get 30 clicks or more up into space and get in some rough orbit and get over some portion of the United States and detonate, either salvage fused if somebody shoots something at you, or just detonate, you could have a massive effect without being accurate at all, and even try a shot around the South Pole, and if that doesn't work, don't say anything and go try another one later. There are just a number of vulnerabilities that stem from the nature of electromagnetic pulse that people really are so appalled by, they often don't want to deal with the matter at all. And in some ways, this is our biggest problem, that some of the difficulties that we face here, in particular the takedown, the comparatively easy takedown of major portions of, or even in some circumstances all of the North American electrical grid, creates a situation where people just say, this is just too hard, this is just too massive, it's too scary, I'm going to go do something else. Part of what we need to do is make sure people understand that in a lot of circumstances, we're talking about the massive expenditure of roughly 20 cents per electricity consumer per year on some of the important types of steps that can usefully be taken. So part of what we need to do is understand the way one can utilize technology in a very affordable way to make a real difference in our vulnerabilities to cyber and its related threats. I want to close by just saying a word about the issue of physical survivability of the grid. I got a call from Amory Lovins a few months ago, who is an old friend of my wife's and mine, and has his finger in lots of pots, and one of them was, he said, "Jim, do you realize there was an attack in just north of San Jose a couple of months ago by a very disciplined groups with AK-47s taking out the 911 emergency call capacity and taking out 17 of the 20 transformers that supply the electricity to the valley?" And I said, "Duh, no, I didn't know." Turned out it was covered in the San Jose press a little bit, kind of, sort of, as vandalism at electrical facility. But if you look back at the movies, the films that were taken, this and that and the other thing, it turns out there were 3 or 4 extremely disciplined guys with AK-47s. Timing was perfect, deployment was perfect, destruction of the 911 system was perfect, except they couldn't get at the 911 calls that went from cell phones. And that is what one person did hear, the rifle fire that was going after the transformers, and did channel some people from the electrical company to see what was going on. Actually, the highway patrol came by first, and they didn't see anything wrong. They didn't know what a transformer was or why it wouldn't have holes in it or should not have holes in it. And so they kind of went on, and finally they showed up several hours later and realized how close they had come, this group had come, to taking out 17 of the 20 transformers for Silicon Valley. A piece on the web within the last few days indicates that something rather similar a month or so ago happened in Arkansas. The first one, by the way, happened the day after the Boston Marathon bomb explosion, so might have been timed very carefully along with that. So although it's not quite at the level of ability to destroy and take down systems that one would see from an electromagnetic pulse shot or a very clever cyber attack, physical attacks are possible, and again, like the cyber and the included case of EMP, some of the fixes are really pretty simple and pretty cheap. And a lot of these fixes are not necessarily perfect fixes, but they're things like taking a transformer that has fulfilled most of its useful life but still has some utility left and putting it in, say, a little stone house somewhere near where it's needed, instead of throwing it away or disposing of it. There are just a number of steps that one can take this overall area of vulnerability of the grid.